I never thought checking my photos at a cafe in Barcelona would make my blood run cold. But there he was, the man in the blue windbreaker, lurking in the background of every single picture from the past week. 7 different cities, always alone, always watching. Let me start from the beginning. I'd saved for 2 years to backpack through Europe solo. My first real adventure after college. The plan was simple. Start in London, zigzag through Western Europe, and end up in Rome. I'd done all the research, booked the hostels, and memorized enough basic phrases in 4 languages to at least order coffee without embarrassing myself. The first few days in London were exactly what I'd imagined. I wandered through Camden Market, took cheesy photos at Platform 9 3/4, and made friends with my Australian bunkmate at the hostel. Looking back now, I wish I'd paid more attention to the quiet guy who always seemed to be reading in the hostel's common room. It wasn't until Paris that I first got that nagging feeling. You know the one, when the back of your neck prickles and you just know someone's watching you. I was sitting on the steps of Sacré-Cœur, eating a pain au chocolate and watching the sunset, when I noticed him taking photos. Nothing unusual there. Everyone takes photos at Sacré-Cœur. But he wasn't pointing his camera at the stunning view of Paris. His lens was aimed in my direction. I brushed it off. Paris is full of tourists taking random photos. But then I saw him again the next day at the Louvre, and again at the cafe where I had dinner. Same blue windbreaker, same camera, same close-cropped dark hair. Still, I told myself I was being paranoid. Paris is a major tourist destination. Coincidences happen, but Amsterdam couldn't be a coincidence. I'd chosen a small, out-of-the-way hostel in the Jordan district, deliberately off the main tourist track. Yet there he was at breakfast, sitting alone with his coffee, pretending to read a newspaper. Our eyes met briefly before he looked away. My hands shook as I texted my mom, trying to sound casual while asking her to track my phone's location, just in case. That night, I switched hostels without updating my online itinerary. I even doubled back several times on my way there, ducking through shops and taking random turns. I felt silly doing it, but that knot in my stomach wouldn't go away. I barely slept, jumping at every creak in the old building. The next morning, I nearly convinced myself I'd imagined the whole thing. Then I spotted him at the Van Gogh Museum, his camera hanging around his neck like always. This time, when he saw me notice him, he didn't look away. He smiled. I spent that afternoon in a police station, trying to explain to an officer who spoke limited English that someone was following me. Yes, taking photos in public places is legal. No, he hadn't actually approached me. No, I didn't have proof. I left feeling helpless and stupid. But I wasn't stupid. In Berlin, I started documenting everything. I took photos of my own, careful to capture him in the background. I noted times, locations, what he was wearing. The blue windbreaker was like his uniform. Same with the camera, a high-end Canon that looked too professional for a casual tourist. I also started noticing the pattern. He was always alone, never talked to anyone, would show up at major tourist spots where I was visiting, but also at tiny local cafes I'd randomly choose for lunch. He had to be tracking me somehow. That's when I checked my phone for unfamiliar apps and found it. Buried in a folder was a location-sharing app one didn't remember downloading. My hands were shaking so badly, I could barely delete it. The next day, I did something I'd never done before. I walked straight up to him. He was sitting at his usual distance, camera in hand, outside a coffee shop in Prenzlauer Berg. As soon as I started moving toward him, he stood up and walked away, disappearing into the crowd before I could reach him. That night, I triple-checked the locks on my hostel room door and wedged a chair under the handle. I was about to turn off my light when I noticed an envelope had been slipped under my door. Inside was a single sheet of paper with my entire itinerary printed on it, including places I'd only mentioned in private emails to my family. There were dates and times going back to London, with notes about what I'd worn each day, where I'd eaten, who I'd talked to. At the bottom was a simple message: "See you in Munich." I booked a flight home that night, abandoning the rest of my carefully planned trip. As I sat in the airport at 3 a.m., waiting for the first flight out, I scrolled through my camera roll one last time. That's when I realized something that made my heart stop. In every photo where he appeared in the background, he was looking directly at the camera. He had wanted me to notice him all along. The security line at the airport has never felt longer. Every time someone brushed past me, I flinched. Every man in a blue jacket made my heart race. It wasn't until the plane took off that I finally let myself breathe. Now, 3 months later, I still check the background of every photo I take. I still look over my shoulder in crowds. And sometimes, when I'm scrolling through social media late at night, I swear I catch glimpses of a blue windbreaker in other people's travel photos from Europe. The police never found him. They said without more evidence, there wasn't much they could do. But I keep wondering, was I just the latest in a string of solo travelers he'd followed? Or was I special somehow? And what would have happened if I'd stayed to find out what he had planned for Munich? I'll never know the answers, and maybe that's for the best. But one thing's for certain, I'll never travel alone again. And if you do, take it from me, always check the background of your photos. You never know who might be watching. Sometimes I think about that first day in London in the hostel common room. If I had paid more attention, would I have noticed him then? Would I have seen him planning, watching, waiting for the perfect target? These days, I notice everything. I have to, because somewhere out there, a man in a blue windbreaker is still carrying his camera, still watching, still waiting for the next solo traveler who won't notice him until it's too late. The first notification came at 3:17 a.m., motion detected in living room. We were all sleeping upstairs at the time, all 5 of us huddled in the master bedroom after a long day at the beach. When I watched the footage the next morning, the empty living room was perfectly still, but the camera had slowly panned, all on its own, scanning the room like a predator searching for prey. We'd been thrilled to find this beachfront property on such short notice. 5 bedrooms, private beach access, and surprisingly affordable for peak season. The listing mentioned a state-of-the-art security system as a bonus feature. The cameras were visible but discreet, small black domes in the corners of common areas that connected to an app on my phone. The first 2 days were perfect. My wife Sarah and our 3 kids spent hours on the beach, building sandcastles and collecting shells. The house was everything we'd hoped for, spacious, modern, with huge windows overlooking the ocean. The kids loved having their own rooms, though 10-year-old Emma complained about the red light from her camera blinking at night. Wait, her camera? I pulled up the house's floor plan on my phone. There were only supposed to be cameras in the entryways and common areas. When I checked the app, I counted 12 camera feeds. The listing had mentioned only 4. I called the property owner, Mark, who answered on the first ring despite the early hour. His voice was oddly cheerful as he insisted there were only 4 cameras in the house, all in the locations listed. When I told him I was looking at 12 different feeds, he went quiet for a moment before suggesting I delete and reinstall the app. That's when I noticed something else. The camera views included angles that seemed impossible given the visible camera's locations. Some looked down from ceiling height, others were at waist level, and one, the one in Emma's room, seemed to be coming from inside her closet. I spent the rest of that morning hunting for cameras, while Sarah took the kids to the beach. I found 3 more than the app showed, hidden in air vents, smoke detectors, and yes, in Emma's closet behind a fake power outlet. But that still didn't account for all the feeds I could see on the app. That afternoon, my phone buzzed every few minutes. Motion detected in kitchen, motion detected in hallway, motion detected in master bathroom. Each time, the footage showed empty rooms, but the cameras would move, focusing on doors, windows, and beds. Sarah was getting the same notifications on her phone. I called the police, but without proof that Mark was responsible for the extra cameras. They said it was a civil matter. I called the rental company next, but they just sent me to Mark's voicemail. That night, we packed up to leave, but our car wouldn't start. The battery was completely dead. Despite being fine earlier that day, while we waited for roadside assistance, the notifications became constant. The cameras were moving more aggressively now, and some had started making a faint whirring sound as they turned. Motion detected in Emma's room. Motion detected in garage. Motion detected in dining room. Motion detected outside front door. The last one made me freeze. There weren't any exterior cameras listed on the rental agreement. I pulled up the feed and felt my stomach drop. The camera was pointed at our dead car, and in the frame was a figure in dark clothing, crouched by the front tire. As I watched, they looked directly into the camera and waved. Sarah screamed from upstairs. One of the hallway cameras had rotated 180 degrees to point directly at her. When she tried to cover it with a towel, another camera on the opposite wall turned to watch her. Then another, and another. We huddled in the living room, watching in horror as every camera in the house turned to face us. The app was now showing 16 different feeds. Then 17, 18. New camera angles kept appearing, showing parts of the house we hadn't even been in. My phone rang. It was Mark. "Is everything okay?" he asked, his voice dripping with concern that felt rehearsed. "I'm seeing a lot of motion alerts." "We're leaving," I said firmly. "We found the hidden cameras. All of them." He laughed softly. "Did you really find all of them, though?" The call disconnected. Moments later, every light in the house went out. In the darkness, we could see the red recording lights of the cameras. Dozens of them now, blinking in corners we hadn't checked, behind pictures we hadn't moved, in ceilings we couldn't reach. Each one tracking our movements like mechanical eyes. My phone lit up with a new notification. Motion detected in all rooms. The footage showed shadowy figures moving through the house. All the cameras were picking them up now. But when I looked around our room, we were still alone. Sarah grabbed my arm. On my phone screen, one of the figures had stopped to look directly into a camera. It was Mark. Behind him were at least 6 other people, all staring into different cameras, all waving slowly. The sound of a car engine made us jump. Through the window, we could see headlights approaching. Several vehicles were pulling into the driveway. My phone buzzed one final time. "Welcome to tonight's show. Your family has been selected as our featured entertainment. Our viewers are very excited to meet you." We ran through the back door, across the beach, barefoot and terrified, until we found a police car patrolling the boardwalk. The officer called for backup immediately, but by the time they reached the house, it was empty. The extra cameras had vanished. Our suitcases were arranged neatly by the front door. The car started perfectly. Mark was never found. The rental company claimed they had no record of him, despite our reservation confirmation and payment receipts. The house listing disappeared from every platform. We later discovered similar stories from other families. Different houses, different names, but always the multiplying cameras, the mysterious figures, the invitation to be part of the show. Some families reported finding small cameras in their luggage after returning home, still trying to connect to unknown networks. Now, whenever we travel, we scan every room ourselves. We cover every vent, check every outlet, and never, ever use house security systems. But sometimes, late at night in our own home, I still see blinking red lights in the corners of my vision. And my phone still gets occasional notifications. Motion detected. I never open them, but I know they're still watching. Somewhere out there, an audience is waiting for the next family to star in their twisted show. And Mark is still out there too, setting up his cameras, selecting his cast, preparing for another performance. So check your vacation rentals cameras. Count them, then count them again. And if the number starts to change, run. When we lost the GPS signal, I wasn't worried. When we lost the trail markers, I started to get concerned. But when we began seeing fresh boot prints following our own, prints that hadn't been there minutes before, that's when true fear set in. Someone was hunting us through these woods, and the sun was rapidly setting. The morning had started perfectly. Jenny and I were celebrating our 3rd anniversary with a weekend hiking trip in Cascade National Park. We'd researched the Cathedral Ridge Trail extensively, a moderate 6-hour loop with stunning valley views. The weather forecast showed clear skies, and we'd packed everything on the recommended list, down to the extra batteries for our GPS unit. The first 2 hours were exactly what we'd hoped for. The autumn air was crisp, and the maple leaves painted the forest in brilliant reds and golds. We passed a few other hikers early on, exchanging cheerful nods and trail conditions. By noon, we'd reached the ridge overlook where we planned to have lunch. That's when Jenny first noticed something odd. "Have you seen any other hikers in the last hour?" she asked, pulling out our trail mix. I hadn't. But that wasn't unusual for a Thursday afternoon in October. What was unusual was the complete silence. No bird calls, no rustling in the underbrush, nothing. The GPS started glitching during lunch, the screen flickering between our location and random points miles away. I wasn't too concerned. We had a paper map and the trail was well marked. At least, it had been well marked up until that point. After lunch, things got strange. The trail markers stopped matching our map. We'd find a blue blaze indicating the Cathedral Ridge Trail, but our map showed we should be seeing yellow blazes for the Valley Loop. Some trees had multiple blazes in different colors. Others had marks that looked freshly painted over. "Let's turn back," Jenny suggested, trying to keep her voice steady. I agreed, but when we turned around, the trail behind us looked different. The fallen log we'd crossed 20 minutes ago was gone. The distinctive split birch tree I'd photographed was nowhere in sight. That's when we first noticed the boot prints. They appeared behind us, following our own tracks, heavy, deliberate impressions in the soft earth. At first, they were spaced normally, about a stride apart, but as we quickened our pace, so did the spacing of the prints. Someone was gaining on us. We started jogging, our backpacks bouncing uncomfortably. The trail forked repeatedly, each path looking equally wrong. The shadows grew longer as the sun crept toward the horizon. Our phones showed no service, and the GPS was now completely dead. "Look," Jenny whispered, pointing to a fresh print forming in the mud beside her foot. Whoever was following us had just stepped there, but there was no one in sight. The forest remained eerily silent. We ran. The boot prints kept appearing, closer and closer together, but always just behind us. Never beside us. Never ahead. Always following. The trail narrowed, winding between steep rock faces. We had to slow down to navigate the terrain. That's when we heard it. The first human sound in hours. A whistle. Just 3 notes, repeated slowly, coming from somewhere behind us. Jenny grabbed my arm. "There," she mouthed, pointing to a narrow gap between 2 boulders. A side trail we hadn't noticed before, barely wide enough to squeeze through. We took it. The passage twisted through the rocks before opening into a small clearing. An old fire tower stood in the center, its metal frame rusty but intact. We climbed, our breathing ragged, until we reached the observation platform 30 feet up. From this height, we could see for miles. The main trail was visible below us, snaking through the trees. And there, moving slowly along it, was a figure in dark clothing. They stopped directly beneath the tower and looked up. I fumbled for my phone to take a photo, but Jenny grabbed my wrist. The figure wasn't casting a shadow, despite the low sun. As we watched, they raised their hand in a wave and then split into 2 identical figures. Then 4, then 8. Each copy started walking in a different direction, their movements perfectly synchronized. The whistling began again, coming from all of them at once, the sound distorting as it echoed off the rocks. Night was falling fast now. We had no choice but to stay in the tower, hoping our flashlight batteries would last until dawn. Every few minutes, one of the figures would pass below us, always looking up, always waving, always whistling those same 3 notes. Around midnight, the whistling stopped. The figures had vanished, but the boot prints remained, hundreds of them now, circling the tower in complex patterns that seemed to form symbols in the dirt. When the sun finally rose, we practically flew down the trail, following our phone's compass east until we hit the park road. A ranger found us 2 miles later, dehydrated and exhausted. We tried to explain what had happened, but by then, even we weren't sure what we'd seen. The rangers searched the area, but found nothing unusual. The trail markers were all correct, they said. No unusual boot prints. No evidence of anyone else on the trail that day. The fire tower, they informed us, had been demolished 3 years ago after a lightning strike. We moved away from the mountains after that. Some nights, I still hear those 3 whistled notes in my dreams. Jenny won't talk about it, but I've caught her studying the photos from that day, looking for figures in the background. Last week, we received an unmarked envelope. Inside was a single photograph, a view looking down from high above the trees, showing 2 people climbing a fire tower that shouldn't exist. In the dirt below, boot prints spell out words we can't quite read. The photo is dated next Thursday. I've buried the envelope in my desk drawer, but I can still hear it whispering those 3 notes. And sometimes, when I look out our window at night, I see fresh boot prints in our garden, forming and fading like ripples in water. They're getting closer to our door. The strangest part, the prints match our own hiking boots, the ones we left behind in the forest that day, the ones we were too afraid to go back for, the ones that, according to the rangers, were found neatly placed at the trailhead a week later, filled with fresh dirt and arranged to point toward our new home. The bobby pin made a soft scraping sound as I ran it along the edge of my room's full-length mirror. There it was, a hairline gap where there shouldn't be one. My hand trembled as I pulled out my phone and checked the hotel's original blueprints again. According to the building plans from 1985, there should be nothing but solid wall behind this mirror. But something wasn't right, and my missing moisturizer was just the beginning. I'd booked the Mountain Lotus Spa Resort for a week of solo relaxation after my divorce. The place had stellar reviews, boasting about their healing mineral pools and innovative wellness treatments. The price was steep, but I figured I deserved it after the year I'd had. The first signs were subtle. On day 2, I returned from my morning massage to find my toiletries slightly rearranged. The toothpaste was on the left side of the sink instead of the right. My face wash was turned label inward. Small things, the kind you almost convince yourself you're imagining. Then my moisturizer vanished. Not just misplaced, but gone. When I mentioned it to the front desk, they sent up a complimentary replacement within minutes. Too quickly, I realized later, as if they'd been expecting my call. That night, I woke to the sound of water running. The bathroom faucet was on, just a trickle, but I distinctly remembered checking it before bed. I blamed my sleeping pills and tried to shake off the unease. The next day, I started taking photos of my room before leaving for treatments. Nothing obvious changed, but when I compared the pictures, tiny details jumped out. A wrinkle in the bedspread that had shifted. My suitcase zipper facing a different direction. The desk chair turned 5 degrees to the left. The hotel staff maintained their practiced serenity when I asked if anyone had entered my room. Our system shows no key card entries except your own, the manager assured me, her smile never wavering. And our housekeeping staff only services rooms when requested. I requested the room's entry logs. They showed only my card, used at the times I remembered entering. But something still felt wrong. I started doing research. The Mountain Lotus had changed ownership 3 times in 5 years. Review sites showed scattered complaints about missing items and strange noises, all dismissed by management as guest errors or old building sounds. But one review caught my eye, a guest claiming they'd seen someone slip through a mirror into the wall. The comment had been deleted within hours, but it sent me down a rabbit hole of the hotel's history. The original blueprints showed a complex network of service corridors, common in luxury hotels of that era. But the renovation plans from 2019 made no mention of them. It was as if they'd simply been erased from the records. That's when I started examining my room's mirror. It ran floor to ceiling, making the room feel larger and brighter. But as I studied it, I noticed the frame was unusually deep, and there was that gap, tiny but definite, along one edge. I might have convinced myself I was being paranoid if it wasn't for what happened next. I was soaking in the oversized tub when I heard it, a soft scraping sound from the bedroom. I froze, holding my breath. The mirror's reflection was visible from where I sat, and I watched in horror as it slowly, silently, swung away from the wall like a door. A hand emerged from the darkness behind it, a pale hand wearing a hotel staff ring. It reached out, picked up my room key from the dresser, and withdrew. The mirror eased shut with a nearly imperceptible click. I waited until my heart stopped pounding before getting out of the tub. The mirror looked solid again, but now I knew better. I packed my bags immediately, but when I tried to check out, my key card wouldn't work in the elevator. System error, the front desk claimed. We'll have maintenance look at it right away. Why don't you enjoy the spa while you wait? That was 3 hours ago. I'm sitting in my room now, watching the mirror. The sun is setting, casting strange shadows across its surface. My new moisturizer sits on the dresser. Half used already, though I've never opened it. My phone's cellular service has stopped working, and the hotel's Wi-Fi keeps dropping. The entry log still shows no one has entered my room but me. But I know they're watching. They probably always have been. Every luxury resort needs service access, after all. And who would suspect the mirrors? I can hear footsteps in the walls now. Soft, measured steps moving between rooms. Sometimes they stop outside my mirror, and I see the smallest shift in its reflection, like someone adjusting their position to get a better view. The hotel's website boasts about their attentive invisible service. I just didn't realize how little that description was. A note just slid under my door. We hope you're enjoying your stay. Your evening meditation session begins in 30 minutes. Please leave your room key on the dresser while you're gone. I'm not going to meditation. I'm writing this from the bathroom, where I've wedged a chair under the door handle. The scraping sound has started again. The mirror is moving. They're not just using the service corridors for maintenance anymore. They're living in them, watching, waiting, taking what they want and replacing it with something else. My moisturizer isn't the only thing that's different. My face in the mirror looks wrong somehow. Newer, smoother, like someone's been doing more than just stealing my skincare products. The gap in the mirror is widening. I can see movement in the darkness behind it. More pale hands with hotel rings. They're reaching out, beckoning. Maybe this is what the spa meant by their total transformation package. Maybe this is why no one ever posts after photos of their stay here. Maybe this is why the hotel keeps changing ownership. Because eventually, someone notices that the guests who check in aren't quite the same as the ones who check out. I think I hear the meditation bells ringing. The mirror is fully open now, and the face is looking back at me from the darkness. They're wearing my moisturizer, using my skincare routine, practicing my smile. They're ready to provide the ultimate in personalized service. And I'm finally understanding why the resort's motto is, "Leave your old self behind." The hands are reaching for me. They feel like my own. I first noticed something was wrong when the Caribbean sunset appeared on our starboard side. Elementary geography and 3 days at sea had taught me that on a southbound cruise, the sun should set to our right, not our left. But when I pointed this out to the crew member restocking the pool towels, he smiled vacantly and said, "Weather's beautiful today, isn't it?" before walking away. The Emerald Princess was supposed to be a dream vacation, a luxury 8-day cruise through the Caribbean with my wife Lauren. We'd saved for 2 years, splurging on a balcony suite and all the premium packages. The first 2 days were perfect, filled with umbrella drinks, spa treatments, and lazy afternoons by the pool. Then came the announcement about the course change. Due to unexpected weather conditions, the captain's voice crackled over the PA system. We'll be making a slight deviation from our planned route. No further explanation was given. The ship's app showed our position as a blank blue square, and the interactive map in the lobby mysteriously went dark. I tried calling home that evening, but the satellite phones were temporarily out of service. The Internet Cafe's computers displayed only the ship's internal network. When I asked the purser about sending an email, she handed me a comment card for the dining room instead. Lauren noticed the passengers disappearing first. Wasn't that couple supposed to perform tonight? She whispered during dinner, pointing to an empty table where the retired Broadway singers had sat every evening. Their water glasses were still half full, napkins crumpled beside untouched desserts. We started keeping count. 8 empty tables at breakfast, 12 vacant deck chairs that had been occupied all morning, 3 cabins on our floor with "Do Not Disturb" signs that never moved. The ship felt emptier, but the crew maintained there were still 2,743 passengers aboard, exactly the same number as when we departed. The crew themselves began acting strange. Their movements became synchronized, almost choreographed. They all gave identical answers to questions, word for word, like actors reading from a script. And their name tags kept changing. Mary became Marie, but their faces stayed the same. On the 4th night, we heard the engine stop. The sudden silence woke us at 3 a.m. Through our balcony door, I could see nothing but darkness. No stars, no moon, no reflection on the water. Just void. Lauren grabbed my arm. "Listen," she whispered. In the quiet, we could hear footsteps in the corridor. Dozens of sets, moving in perfect unison. Then voices, speaking in a language I didn't recognize. When I opened our cabin door, the hallway was empty, but all the other doors were slightly ajar. The next morning, half the dining room was vacant. The breakfast buffet offered foods we'd never seen before. Strange fruits with impossible colors, meats that didn't look quite right. The coffee tasted like seawater. I cornered a junior officer near the engine room door. "Where are we?" I demanded. He stared at me blankly before responding. "Weather's beautiful today, isn't it?" His accent had changed mid-sentence, shifting from Australian to Russian to something entirely unfamiliar. The ship's daily newsletter appeared under our door as usual, but the text was gibberish, random letters and symbols that rearranged themselves when I looked away. The activity schedule listed events like void gazing at sunset and eternal dance lesson mandatory. Lauren discovered the photographs next. Every picture we'd taken since boarding showed more people in the background than we remembered. Faces appeared in windows that should have been empty, and in each successive photo, the crew members' eyes reflected light differently, like cats' eyes in the dark. On day 5, we tried to find our lifeboat station during an unscheduled drill. The ship's layout had changed. Corridors led to dead ends that hadn't existed before. Stairwells went down too many floors. We found an entire promenade deck that wasn't on any map, filled with shops selling items I can't describe. The captain made another announcement. "We are pleased to welcome our new passengers aboard." The voice didn't sound human anymore. That night, we watched from our balcony as the ship passed another cruise liner. It was completely dark, no running lights, moving parallel to us through the impossible blackness. Through binoculars, I could see its deck was crowded with figures, all standing perfectly still, all facing our direction. As I watched, they raised their arms in unison and waved. Lauren grabbed my camera and zoomed in on the other ship's hull. The name had been painted over, but underneath we could make out faded letters. Emerald Princess. This morning, Our room key stopped working. The crew member who came to help had Lauren's face, but didn't recognize us. When we returned from breakfast, all our belongings had been replaced with identical items that looked slightly wrong, like copies made by someone who'd only had them described to them. The ship's app now shows us traveling in a figure-8 pattern through an ocean that doesn't exist on any map. The weather report predicts eternal sunset for the next 7 days. The cabin television plays footage of our cruise, but from angles that would be impossible to film. We just received an invitation to the captain's table for dinner. The time listed is 25:60. Lauren's reflection in the bathroom mirror didn't match her movements this morning, and I'm starting to forget what city we departed from. The crew still says there are exactly 2,743 passengers aboard. They're right, in a way. That number never changes. It's just not the same 2,743 we started with. I can hear the dinner announcement now. The words aren't in any language I know, but somehow I understand them perfectly. Lauren's taking longer in the bathroom than usual. When she comes out, I'm not sure it'll be her anymore. The sunset is on the wrong side again. It's been setting for 6 hours now. And through our balcony door, I can see other cruise ships emerging from the darkness. Dozens of them, all dark, all identical, all filled with passengers waving in unison. The crew was right about one thing. The weather really is beautiful today. It has been for the past 1,000 sunsets. The muddy footprints leading from where our car should have been stopped abruptly at the cabin's crawl space. They were fresh, still filling with rainwater, and they were made by shoes much larger than any of ours. I followed the beam of my flashlight to where they disappeared under the cabin's foundation, and that's when I heard the first scratch against the floorboards above my family's heads. We'd rented the mountain cabin for what was supposed to be a weekend getaway from the city. After 2 months of overtime at the office and the kids' endless sports practices, Sarah and I decided we needed to unplug and reconnect. The listing had seemed perfect. 20 miles from the nearest town, no Wi-Fi, no cell service. Just us, the woods, and blessed silence. The first red flag appeared as we were unloading the car. 10-year-old Emily's stuffed bear, the one she'd had since birth, vanished between the car and the front door. We searched everywhere, but it was like it had evaporated. Sarah suggested it might have fallen under the car. But when I checked, I noticed something odd about the gravel underneath. It had been recently disturbed, with strange circular patterns that reminded me of crop circles, only miniature. I should have trusted my gut then, but I dismissed it as paranoia. We spent the afternoon settling in, unpacking groceries, choosing bedrooms, and exploring the property. The cabin was rustic but well-maintained, with 3 bedrooms upstairs and a cozy living room with a stone fireplace. The kids were thrilled to discover a collection of board games, and soon we were deep into a competitive round of Monopoly. The scratching started just after sunset. At first, it was so faint we thought it was tree branches against the windows. But there weren't any trees close enough to touch the house. The sound moved across the ceiling in deliberate patterns, like something was testing the structure above us. Probably just squirrels, I said, trying to convince myself as much as the kids. But squirrels don't move in perfect geometric patterns, and they certainly don't tap out rhythms that sound almost like code. We went to bed early, tired from the drive and fresh mountain air. Around midnight, Sarah shook me awake. "The car," she whispered. "Do you hear it?" I did. The distinct sound of our car's alarm being disabled, followed by doors opening and closing. By the time I got to the window, the car was gone. Not stolen gone. The gravel driveway was empty except for fresh footprints that definitely hadn't been there when we arrived. I tried to stay calm as I dug out our emergency satellite phone. Dead. Not just dead. When I opened the battery compartment, the batteries had been replaced with small stones arranged in the same circular pattern I'd seen in the gravel. The scratching got louder. 8-year-old Max started crying, and Emily was frozen in her doorway, staring at her closet. "Someone's in there," she whispered. They're holding Mr. Snuggles. I grabbed my flashlight and approached the closet. Empty. Except for Emily's missing bear, sitting perfectly centered on the top shelf. Its head had been turned 180 degrees, and its eyes had been replaced with small stones. That's when the power went out. The darkness was absolute, the kind that only exists 20 miles from civilization. My flashlight beam seemed to be swallowed by it, barely illuminating a few feet ahead. And in that darkness, the scratching changed to footsteps. They started in the attic, heavy, deliberate steps moving in those same geometric patterns. Then they moved down the walls, somehow walking horizontally, circling us. The temperature dropped so rapidly we could see our breath. Sarah gathered the kids in the master bedroom while I checked the doors and windows. Everything was locked, but it didn't matter. The footsteps were inside the walls now, and they were speaking, not in words, exactly, but in patterns of sound that almost made sense, like listening to a conversation underwater, or hearing a familiar song played backwards. The more I listened, the more I could almost understand it. That's when I noticed the crawl space door was open. I shouldn't have looked. I know that now, but I had to know what was down there. The footprints led straight to it, still fresh despite the impossible angles they took to get there. My flashlight beam caught movement in the darkness below the house. Something shifted in patterns that hurt my eyes to look at. And there was our car, somehow crammed into a space far too small to contain it, folded in ways that metal shouldn't be able to fold. The beam caught something else, reflections from dozens of pairs of eyes. Not animal eyes. They were made of the same small stones that had replaced the batteries and the bear's eyes. And they were all blinking in perfect synchronization. I slammed the crawl space door shut and ran back upstairs. The footsteps were getting closer, moving through the walls like they were water. They were looking for something, or someone. Emily screamed from the master bedroom. When I got there, Sarah and the kids were huddled in the corner. The walls were covered in those circular patterns, drawn in something that looked like mud but moved when you watched it too long. And in the center of each circle was a small stone eye. We ran. The front door fought us, but finally gave way. Outside, the darkness was alive with movement. More footprints were appearing in the gravel, forming themselves in front of our eyes. They circled us, herding us away from the trees and back toward the house. That's when we saw them. Dozens of stuffed animals lined up at the tree line, all with their heads turned backward, all with stone eyes. Emily's bear was in the center, and it was walking toward us. We made it 5 miles down the mountain road before a park ranger found us. By the time she drove us back to the cabin, everything looked normal. The car was in the driveway, unfolded. The walls were clean. Emily's bear was sitting innocently on her bed, with its original button eyes. But the patterns are still there if you know where to look. In the gravel, in the walls, in the way shadows move when you're not watching them directly. And sometimes, late at night, I still hear those footsteps moving in geometric patterns that almost make sense. The ranger told us later that we weren't the first family to run from that cabin. Others had reported missing cars, strange patterns, mysterious footsteps. But no one could ever find proof. We found Emily's original bear 3 months later, mailed to our home address with no return label. Its fur was arranged in tiny circular patterns, and when you hold it up to the light, you can still see something moving behind its stone eyes. The cabin's still up for rent. The listing now includes a warning about local wildlife and unusual acoustics. But the reviews all mention the same things: the perfect silence, the geometric patterns in the gravel, the footsteps that move through walls. And on very quiet nights, if you listen carefully, you can still hear them trying to tell us something in their underwater language of scratches and stone.